Ni hao guys, this is the Jade Palace, a channel where we explore modern mixed martial arts from the angle of traditional martial arts. And today we continue our career breakdown of the best representative for TMA in MMA, who coincidentally just happens to be the greatest fighter the sport has ever seen, Georges St-Pierre. Let's get into it. Number 6. Karo Parisyan. First of all, who the hell gets Karo effing Parisyan in their UFC debut and wins? Right, the greatest of all time does. If you don't know what a monster Parisyan was at the time, it's hard to grasp how much of an achievement this even is, but let me tell you, this guy was representing Judo in the sport of MMA decades before Ronda Rousey, and he dominated what was then the top of the food chain. And George goes out in his debut and completely shuts this guy down. To say it's impressive would be a big understatement. Also, an interesting thing to me about this fight is that here we have two representatives for traditional styles. Again, not traditional, but as close as you get with modern sports. Funny enough, I kind of forgot about it at first. Like, I had this almost mechanical note in my head, and if you'd ask me what martial art does Karo Parisyan represent, I would probably answer Judo on autopilot, and yet I didn't necessarily make the obvious connection. It wasn't until I started to watch and got to the first scramble that made me go, wait a minute, it's not only George, the way this other guy grapples also feels familiar. And then it was the slapstick cartoon style moment for me, where first a light bulb lights up above my head, and then I hit myself on the forehead in frustration for being so dumb, not seeing the obvious right in front of my face, and the hit is so hard I become dizzy and see a spinning round dance of stars around my head. It's always funny to catch yourself with this kind of brain farts, but I really forgot for a hot second that just as much as Kyokushin, Judo is also one of those martial arts that is right there in the middle between modern sports and traditional roots. In fact, it's entirely plausible that sooner or later I'll get to breaking down Parisyan's career, or at least some of his fights in a similar fashion. But I digress, so let's get back to the fight on hand. Unfortunately, well, fortunately for the ground game lovers between you, but unfortunately for me with my total of zero expertise in this particular area, most of this fight is decided on the ground, and there are precious few episodes on the feet to pay attention to. But let's look at a couple of those. 4:48 of the first round. A little bit of a very awkward sticky hands here. Now, believe me, I'm very much aware of the fact that I'm in a sense grasping at straws here. This is the tiniest insignificant episode that in itself is neither here nor there, and for as much as many other aspects of George's game are a great representation of traditional martial arts principles and skill set, the one thing that is mostly missing is sticky hands. He does very little of that. And as I've said, this is not a pretty implementation either, but still, correct fundamental principles at the core of it. Gets the point of contact, slides his arm right in but with control, leaving his opponent's arm on the outside, puts one hand then the other onto Karo's face. Now, in combat sports context, where you cannot pinpoint the vitals with your fingers and grips, the only way to make this work would be to have a really good fudging, something that is better known in popular culture as one-inch punch, or in most clinical cases, Bruce Lee's one-inch punch. Also a punch from Kill Bill movie. But I've never seen George demonstrate that he has this particular trick in his toolkit, so without either, mostly just an instrument of control for fighters like John Jones or Conor McGregor. Well, actually Jones probably does deliberately pinpoint the eyes with it, but I guess we'll never know. Anyway, occasional sporadic crude elements of sticky hands from GSP, so not making any grand statements here, just pointing out such details, take it for what it's worth. 4:44 of the first round. See, that's what I meant when I was talking about certain familiarity with the way Karo wrestles here. Freestyle or even Greco wrestlers don't necessarily scramble on the feet the same way. It's this manner of processing and defending threats that to me feels like it bears an unmistakable kinship to things like Tuisho or Shuaijiao. And I'm not even saying one's better or worse than the other, just this style of bodywork has a different flavor to it. I mean, maybe I'm barking up the wrong tree. In another situation I might actually have suspected myself of seeing what I expect to see. But that's the thing, I didn't expect. As I've told you, it completely went out of my head that Parisyan was a judo practitioner when I sat to analyze this fight, and it was only after I saw this exchange that I went, why does this look like what we do? Oh, right, of course, traditional judo. If I take a guess, I would say it's the small yet clear elements of internal work that make the difference. Freestyle wrestling is very much reliant on external energy manipulation. They mainly concentrate on things like redistributing the body weight and using levers, etc. Greco has more internal attention, not necessarily because there is some obscure connection to traditional Asian styles, but rather, I suspect just as a result of convergent evolution, where the limitations in the rule set forced Greco-Roman wrestlers to dig deeper into the minutiae of utilizing bones and tendons and aligning joints with utmost precision, stuff like that. Judo, on the other hand, while being at this point a modern combat sport as well, has a clear historical cultural connection to traditional styles that put heavy emphasis on utilizing internal resources of the body. And while they might have abandoned the vocabulary of condensing the words the dantian and maintaining the yin-yang energy circulation, all that jazz that we concentrate on heavily in traditional wushu, the important part is that they still use some of the methods and stick to the principles that allow for more internal work. 4:52 of the second round. Quality double leg by George, an attempt at classic sprawl by Karo. It might seem like the reason it didn't work was that he just did not throw his hips back quite enough, but upon closer inspection, you can see it's actually a case of very good timing on St-Pierre's part, and also Parisyan being too zealous with his punch, overreaching and off-balancing himself, so by the time he was able to do anything else, George was already all over him. So nothing fancy, just very sound fundamentals by GSP here. 4:32 of the third round. St-Pierre goes in for a double, Parisyan sprawls and tries to create an angle, which in itself is just one of the two standard ways to sprawl, right? You either throw your hips back as far as possible to simply deny opponent a grip, or you rotate horizontally to redirect the incoming power. And especially since the first way didn't work for him 5 minutes earlier, and that mistake cost him the round, it makes sense for him to try the other approach. Problem is, he misread where the point of contact was, which is a very common mistake in sticky hands. Someone thinks their defense is solid, since they project their energy onto a certain point where their arm touches the opponent's arm, but then it turns out the one place they've concentrated all of their attention on is just a superficial rubbing of the skin, while the actual effective point of contact is further down the line, meaning, surprise, the opponent is already inside of their defenses. Well, here you can see a similar mistake projected on a scale of the body. Karo perceives this, his oblique abdominal muscles, to be the point of contact that he needs to rotate around, and from our point of view here we feel the same. But wait for it, he rotates, the arm goes out of the way, and what do we see? Whoops, it was actually his hip. St-Pierre's shoulders was pressing against his hip, so instead of redirecting force, all that Karo's rotation did was expose his flank for a push. And voila. 34 seconds of the third round. Karo goes for the leg, St-Pierre does a sprawl. Notice the way he does it. We'll go into more detail in later fights, but for now just put a mental note, because it's very relevant specifically from the TMA angle. The move might be called sprawl, but in George's case, he tries to remain as upright as possible and returns to stand-up position the moment he can. This attitude will serve him very well throughout his career. Alright guys, let us press pause for a little bit. After all, George's full career includes 26 fights, and we can't possibly hope to get through all of it in one sitting. For now, let's sum up today's lessons very briefly. Number 1. Traditionally derived styles of grappling, like Judo, based on upright posture, staying on your feet, utilizing more internal mechanics, have their own unique strengths. Although, number 2, you still have to be able to defend freestyle-esque leg attacks, or your judo will be nullified. Better yet, have both in your toolkit, like George here. Remember those lessons the next time you go training. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this, kindly project your chi towards the like and subscribe buttons. Also, you know by now that yours truly is on a mission to educate people and dispel myths about traditional martial arts. So if you think it's a noble cause and want to participate, there's no better way than to share this on your social media. And if you're seriously committed, you can even become a supporter of the channel. Which, by the way, also allows you to watch original, less heavily edited cuts. Finally, and most importantly, if you want to come and learn Kung Fu with us, all the links to the school are below. And remember,
your defense. Points come. Concentrate, focus, power. Remember balance. Make good fight.